As Tamara correctly pointed out, one of the innovations of the book of Deuteronomy is a shift in the understanding of where and how prayer is supposed to take place. For the first 4 books of the Torah, prayer takes place when you're walking on the road. Prayer takes place when you wake up in the middle of the night. Prayer takes place when you are moved to pray. It's the book of Deuteronomy that teaches the idea of gathering together in communities for collective worship. Another of the innovations introduced by the book of Deuteronomy is the concept of choice. Deuteronomy is obsessed with the idea that we choose how we are going to live. For the first 4 books of the Torah, we don't have a lot of choices. When we stand at the base of Mount Sinai and God says, "Are you in on this covenant?" it's not exactly a choice. There are people, escaped slaves, in the middle of a desert, entirely dependent on God for food and water, and our rabbis even imagine that God goes one step further, picks up the mountain and holds it over their heads and says, "Are you accepting my covenant? If so, good. If not, I will bury you here." In the first 4 books of the Torah, Jewish people don't get a whole lot of choices. We go where we're told to go, and we sign on to a covenant that we're told is our only option. The book of Deuteronomy changes things. The book of Deuteronomy, in almost each one of our parshiot, contains within it some exhortation to make a conscious, intentional choice for the good, and also a recognition that we are free to go the other way. In the parsha that Ava read last week, we read the 2nd paragraph of the Shema, in which we are told that it is up to us to listen or not. If we listen, things will go well for us. If we don't, the clouds will close and the earth won't yield its bounty. But the choice is ours. Later in the book of Deuteronomy, we'll read, "Today I set you before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life," which Rabbi Yitz Greenberg says is the great principle of the Torah, that the Torah is here to teach us to choose over and over again the path of life. This week's parsha begins with these words, "Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha u'klala." See, today I set before you blessing and curse. As a choice. Are you going to go in the path of blessing? Are you going to go down the wrong road? Who is it up to? You and me. And as I was looking at this verse, I came across this really funky, fun, interesting passage in the Talmud, this vision of the end of days. Messiah has come and God has shown up, and God puts the evil inclination, the part of ourselves that leads us toward selfishness and destructive behavior, puts the evil inclination on trial and ultimately decides to execute it in the presence of everyone. This incredibly weird, cool image of God slaughtering at the end the Yetzer Hara, like the end of the Passover Seder when we imagine God finally killing off the angel of death. Rabbi Yehuda taught, in the future God will destroy the evil inclination in the presence of the righteous and the wicked. For the righteous, the evil inclination will appear as a high mountain, and for the wicked, it will appear as a mere strand of hair. These will weep, and those will weep. Both the righteous and the wicked will weep. The righteous will weep and say, "How are we ever able to overcome so high a mountain?" And the wicked will weep and say, "How were we unable to overcome just a mere strand of hair?" Such an interesting, beautiful, enigmatic image. This image of the Yetzer Hara, that selfish, destructive drive, appearing differently to these two groups. To the group that was successful in holding it back, it appears as a mountain. To the group who was unsuccessful, it appears as a tiny hair. To those who lived lives of justice and goodness, they look at it and say, how did I ever overcome this mountain? To those who live lives of pettiness and smallness, they look at it and look at themselves and say, how could I not even triumph over a tiny hair? The Hasidic Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter of Ger, who wrote a book called the Sfat Emet, offers a commentary on this. He says, the fact is that the evil inclination was only ever a tiny hair. But to the righteous, as they overcome each challenge, the strands pile up. And as they keep doing so, they accumulate over time into a mountain. But the wicked one is stuck, always facing down the same tiny little hair. For this reason, one should never become too proud of having reached a high level, for even in that place there'll be two paths. This is the life of righteousness, ever needing to choose the good. Sometimes in our lives, a few times in our lifetimes, we're called to make huge, bold sacrifices or great acts of moral courage. But that's not most days, most weeks, most months, most years. Most of our lives is not in big, bold, world-defining events. Most of our lives is in tiny little choices. 100 of them, 1,000 of them a day. Opportunities each time to either say the kind thing or the unkind thing, to either step up and do what's right, or to hope that somebody else will take care of it. Either to open our eyes or to shut them, either to open our hearts or to shut them, 1,000 times a day, a hair at a time, one tiny little choice, and one tiny little choice after that, and one tiny choice after that. Insignificant, each of them. Practically meaningless, each of them. And it's only in retrospect when we see, if we could see, the pile of those choices, the mountain of those choices, the great thrust of our life that was defined by those choices, whether we walked a life of goodness and kindness or we walked a life of selfishness and pettiness, not apparent in each one of the tiny little moments, only somehow in being able to pull back and to see the mountain, to see the collective sense of our impact, the collective way in which we walk in the world. We start Rosh Chodesh Elul this week, the month of preparation for the High Holy Days. We start the work of looking inward and saying, how did I live this year? Where did I step up and where did I fall short? Where did we as a community step up and fall short? Where did we as a nation step up and fall short? Where have we as a world stepping up and where have we fallen critically short? And some of those things that we'll cast our mind back to were big decisions, were big moments, but most of them will have been tiny. Tiny, seemingly insignificant hairs. But they collectively made up the moral balance of the year that was. I hope that as we all, me included, dive ourselves into that work, that we find ourselves proud of the vast majority of choices that we made, that we look at that mountain and say, wow, little bit by little bit, we built for ourselves good lives. And in those places where we fell short, that we recognize that the ability to make a better choice was actually only ever about moving a hair. It's not so hard. It's not so hard to be kind instead of unkind. It's not so hard to step up instead of falling back. It's not so hard to choose to live our values every day. It's just one tiny little choice after another. I hope we look at our mountain and feel proud of ourselves. I hope we look at our deficits and recognize that we have the capacity to do better. I hope tomorrow, as you keep on this road of bat mitzvah, of assuming responsibility for your own choices as a Jewish woman, I hope that you'll continue to choose. That you'll continue to choose the path that you have committed to today, that you continue to choose the road that's been laid out by your family, that you continue to find joy and fun in being part of Jewish community, that you continue to radiate your light out that draws us all in like a beacon. I hope that for you. I hope that for us. Shabbat Shalom.